Ever felt thrown into leadership without a guidebook? In today's episode, I chat with Dr. Julie Donley, former nurse director turned leadership coach, who's transformed chaos into clarity. Her journey from abandonment at 16 to reshaping work culture is one you absolutely won't forget. Let's dive in.
I think it's interesting that so many people learn just as many lessons from a poor leadership experience as a good leadership, possibly more than from a good leadership experience.
When your staff tells you that they're looking forward to Mondays, it just tells you're doing something right. Do you know what the most stressful day of the week is?
You start work on a Monday morning, it's a Sunday afternoon.
Exactly. It's Sunday afternoons. People get really stressed out because they're anxious about their next day.
If you're new to leadership, let some things burn whilst you figure out the other things. Then you can pick up these other things and let these things burn. And eventually you'll juggle everything. Healthcare is terrible for throwing people in the deep end and expecting them to swim.
Find yourself some way to work with or learn from someone who's gone before, because you are not alone. But don't let that stop you from doing what you need to do to learn what you need to learn to be as effective as you can be. So you can bring out the best in your teammates and create a very high-performing team. If communication breaks down, if morale is low, or if turnover's high, then those aren't just HR problems, they're leadership problems. It's the soft stuff that makes the hard stuff work. Leadership isn't about control. It's about creating space for others to contribute, grow, and take ownership. People don't want to be micromanaged. They want to be trusted, respected, and heard. Leaders who operate from that top-down command and control style are missing the opportunity.
Stressed out teams, high turnover, and poor leadership. This episode explores how self-awareness and emotional intelligence are quite often the missing links between burnout and real business growth. Dr. Julie Donley is a leadership coach, an award-winning author, and former director of nursing, with over 3 decades of experience transforming high-pressure workplaces into people-centered environments. Julie has a background that spans behavioral health, organisational development, and frontline healthcare. She knows what burnout, disengagement, and poor leadership look like from the inside. And she's led teams through crises, built systems that stick, and championed emotional intelligence in sectors that traditionally overlook it. Now, through her company and her book, Leading at the Speed of People, she helps executives, teams, and businesses lead with empathy, reduce stress, and create real engagement without compromising performance. Julie, welcome to the episode. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Paul, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I have to say, you're the second doctor that we've had on the show. So setting a high bar for the rest of our guests. We had Dr. Erin Burgoon on 3 or 4 months ago now, and fascinating conversation. I love fascinating backgrounds, and your story is no different from a lot of our other guests in that you started in an area where few would connect you to where you are now. Why did you get into nursing in the first place? What attracted you to it?
Well, to nursing, I had no idea what I was going to do when I grew up. And it took me forever to find that path, to get my first degree, which was in business, actually. But I was really drawn to people. And so, and I loved helping people to be their best, to heal, to grow. And that's what led me into nursing. And I went into psychiatric nursing specifically because I wanted to, as I said, help people to be their best. And that was sort of where I could see me doing the most good.
Why psychiatric nursing then? What spoke to you there?
But it's interesting. I just wanted to help people. I had a really rough time coming out of childhood. And so like my parents divorced when I was 16. It was just a horrible time. I mean, there's never a great time, but at 16, everybody left. So my dad left, my mother checked out, my sister moved out because she couldn't bear to be left there either. And so I like all of a sudden find myself on my own and really had no support I don't know. It took me so long to get that first degree. And then I decided on nursing. And a friend said to me, hey, there's this new adolescent unit opening at this local psychiatric facility. Why don't you check that out? So, I was in my 20s still, and I figured, well, why not? And I kind of stumbled my way there, but I was excited about it. And I had not entered nursing school yet. So I started this job on this psychiatric unit before I actually, had even gotten into nursing. So I was on a waiting list. So I had to wait a year. And two things happened. And the first was that I absolutely loved it. I definitely found a great place, a home for me in psych. And I loved working with the kids. And so that was the first thing. And the second thing that happened was the leadership was really bad. And so the work environment, now you have to remember that in a psychiatric center, it's it's dangerous. And you have to be very careful about how you display yourself, your emotional expression, everything. It's called emotional labor because it really is laborious as to how do you control yourself, but also how, understand what others are going through and paying attention to those cues, those signs that danger may be coming, that kind of thing. And so when you have a leader that adds to the danger because of her body language and her lack of ability to communicate and connect. I mean, she was really bad. She was everything that you can imagine. She stirred up chaos and she played favorites and she was just inappropriate with the men and versus the women. I mean, it was like everything that could go wrong went wrong with her. And of course, I was still very young and I'm like watching this going, what? I'm like, don't people understand that she's causing a lot of these problems? And I don't know if they realized that or if they just sort of assumed it was adolescence, because nobody wanted to work there because of the kids. Well, it wasn't just the kids. She would bark orders at people. She didn't treat people nice. And that spurred my interest into leadership and understanding how the impact of what a leader does and how they show up really can make or break the team and can create work environments that either work really well or don't work at all. And was my first experience very young in poor leadership.
Special shout out in today's episode for our charity partners, ADHD Liberty, led by Sarah Templeton, who are part of the fight to prevent the school to prison pipeline for ADHD and neurodiverse individuals. If you'd like to find out more, you can visit them. The show links are in the notes below, and I would encourage you to go along and have a look and educate yourself on their fight. It's an incredibly important cause, and we're super proud to have them as charity partners for the MarketPulse Pros and Pioneers podcast. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your episode.
I think it's interesting that so many people learn just as many lessons from a poor leadership experience as a good leadership, possibly more than from a good leadership experience, because when a good leader is there, kind of everything just kind of flows. But when there's a bad leadership experience, you start to pick apart the why. Or if you're leadership minded, as I call it, like you're aware of how leadership works at some base level, at a people level, you start to see the links between the behaviors and the actions and the outcomes and how people react to that. So I think it's interesting. I guess that desire to put your own stamp on things is why you ended up becoming a director of nursing then.
Yeah. And why I got my doctorate in leadership, right? So I went on to study leadership I was very curious as to how she could get away with it. Honestly, that was part of it. And also, what makes for a good leader then, because that wasn't it. And so, yeah, that really fueled me to study, practice, get involved. And that's what, and yes, I stumbled into coaching in the coaching profession in 2001 and loved that. Was like a great place for me to continue to play, but with different people who were functioning well in the world. You're in psych, people are not functioning. That's why they go into a hospital. So with coaching, that's not where we're playing. We're playing with people who are doing great things and they want to be even more effective. So it was sort of a natural thing for me to move into. And yes, I actually stepped out of coaching to go back into full-time employment to take that director position. I hadn't really left nursing. I had been just, they call it PRN, where you just sort of take a shift here and there. And I loved it. So, I loved playing in that way and working in that field. But then I was approached by an organization to be their director. And I thought, what a great opportunity. And so I dove in, and it was a great opportunity for me. I was like the right person in the right place at the right time. And I knew what needed to be done, but boy, did I have a bad experience in the beginning, because again, I was plopped into this role and there was nobody there to support me. I mean, I literally was handed a set of keys that basically said, okay, have at it. And I'm like, what? Like, I have 3 sites. Can you give me the addresses of the other 2 sites? Like, that's how bad it was. And the woman who I was replacing, she hired me very quickly. Like within 2 weeks, I was hired, and which is unusual at that level. And then she left 2 months later. So I was really glad that she did, because we would not have gotten along very well as leaders. Her leadership style was very chaotic. Um, and so, but that first year, it was really a trial for me. I knew what needed to be done. I just needed to figure everything out. How to, who did I need to know? How did I need to navigate it all? It was a big job. And I just didn't want anyone else to have to do that, have that experience where you don't really have support from your upper leadership. And so I kind of made it my mission, not only to do it then, but as I got through the years, like, I didn't want anyone to have to be orienting themselves, to a job. And so I sort of made it my mission to make sure what I could in that role, to make sure that the nurses had what they needed to be able to excel in their roles. And now, as I've left that career and back into full-time coaching, I have that same mission where I want people to feel like they have the support they need to be great, to thrive in their roles. And that has always driven me into whatever I've been doing, whether it's in, psych. And I think as a director of nursing, I was able to control a lot of that because I was in charge. So I was able to make sure that we were supporting the staff in whatever way we could to ensure that they had what they needed to be successful. And it was great. I remember one day visiting a nurse at one of we had like 7 nursing stations. And so one of the nurses, she had been on vacation. She was the main nurse for one of the nursing stations, and she came back from vacation. So I visited her. I remember asking her, she told me about her vacation, and she was off with her friends. And she said, but I was thrilled to come back to work. I was ready. I love it here. I was happy to come in on Monday. I don't know what my face looked like, but inside, I'm just like, oh my God, thank God, Yes. I mean, when your staff tells you that they're looking forward to Mondays, it just tells you're doing something right. Because we know that stress, the most stressful day of the week, well, do you know what the most stressful day of the week is?
If you start work on a Monday morning, it's a Sunday afternoon.
Exactly. It's Sunday afternoon, Sunday evenings. People get really stressed out because they're anxious about their next day. And so to have her say that to me, it still gives me chills. I was pretty happy about that.
I know that because I've lived that, right? I've lived that like so many people do. I find it interesting that you learned that leadership skill almost yourself, right? Like you're trialing and testing things, you're navigating by the seat of your pants in an environment that you can't allow things to fall over. So now I learned in retail, right? And now retail, yes, there are some things you can't allow to fall over. There are certain things that should never, ever be not right. But there are lots of other things you can let go for a little while and they'll maybe not be great, but they'll get by. And you can't do that in health. You can't do that in the environment that you're talking about. So I've always said to people, look, if you're new to leadership, let some things burn whilst you figure out the other things. Then you can pick up these other things and you can let these things burn. And eventually you'll juggle everything. You'll be all right. But you're in a position where you can't let anything burn. So I can imagine, first of all, that was quite stressful and hard for you as well. When we talk about burnout and, you mentioned that you were managing 155 beds, $2 million budget. It's a lot of responsibility. when you've had no real, and I find this all the time, right? Especially healthcare is terrible for throwing people in the deep end and expecting them to swim. Have you got any tips for anybody who's in that position, in that sort of environment? What's the thing that you wish you'd known at the beginning?
Yeah. That is a great question. And it's so very true, right? Where you're a good accountant, so we're going to just put you in charge. You're a good doctor, so we're going to put you in charge. Leadership skills require they're a different set of skills than whatever you were doing before. In fact, if anything, you're going to be doing less of that original work, and more interpersonal skills, strategic planning, executive skills. And so those skills, don't assume you know them. It's like you have to learn them and practice them. Because even if you read a great book on leadership, well, one isn't going to get you there. You might need to read 50 or 60. But even if you do the work and look, I have a doctorate in leadership, you study it, you have to then go out in the world and practice it, because it's different in the different contexts within which you work. And so I think recognizing that you are not alone, that's the first thing, and getting help. I mean, it's why I coach people, right? And so a lot of times, I know for me, there was a point in my journey as a director of nursing where I really didn't have like a coach or mentor there, and I wanted more support. So of course, as a coach, I just hired one for myself, and I didn't think anything of it. I mean, it would have been nice if they had paid for it, but I didn't care. I knew that I wanted to represent myself in a certain way, and that, people are watching you. They're learning from you as especially when you have a position or a title. And so you get to decide who you want to be, how you want to show up. And there are certain things that you definitely need to know as a leader. And the first is, the vision. Where are you going? And the second is the values that you are aspiring to and that you expect other people to aspire to. And those values should be pretty similar to the organization. You wouldn't want them to be too incongruent with what the organization is doing, but they may be a little different. And those need to be communicated effectively to others. So there's a lot to know. I did just put a course together on a comprehensive course on leadership called Leading at the Speed of People. It's not out yet. It should be out within the next couple of weeks though. And so if people are looking for a way to learn that's not, if they don't want to hire a coach or don't want to do that route, that is another way. But find yourself some way to work with or learn from someone who's gone before, because you are not alone. And, I work with people now, like, performing leadership development. And it's one of the consistent themes that I hear. It doesn't really matter what industry you're in or what kind of leader, what you're leading. You're leading people. And that's kind of how I came up with the title for my book. You're not leading things. So it doesn't matter if you're in accounting or if you're in healthcare or if you're in, a tech. You're still leading people. And that requires you to be able to confront conflict, navigate that, show up with your executive presence in a certain way, because you know that people are watching you, and your behavior sets the tone for how people are going to behave. And you need to learn to communicate effectively. All those things go across industries. And so I don't have one particular thing that you need to know, but just know that you don't have to do it alone, that there are plenty of ways to get yourself the support that you need, especially if you're not getting it in your place of employment. And I think that's probably the key, is that sometimes we assume somebody's going to teach us, right? And take us by the hand. And I never had that. I never had anybody take me by the hand and teach me. And so I know a lot of people have, and they've had mentors. I just haven't. And that's okay. But don't let that stop you from doing what you need to do to learn what you need to learn to be as effective as you could be. So you can bring out the best in your teammates and create a very high performing team, because ultimately there's a legacy there. So it's not just what you do, it's what you leave behind when you're gone.
It's
and the
your personal
impact that
brand.
you have.
It's your personal brand.
That's
And
your
people
brand.
don't realize
Exactly.
that the personal brand proliferates far beyond social media. It's how people talk about you when you're not in the room, and how people understand what you've asked them to do. I love that answer. Thank you, Julie. I think there's a lot to unpick there for people. I wonder, you talked about your vision being incongruent with that of the business or the organization itself. And one of the things I often come across is the conflict of, if I'm going to be a people leader, and I am a people leader, I love leading people, and I worry more about the people than I do about my numbers and my metrics. And you've got to have an eye on both. But quite often I find that senior leadership are often more bothered about the numbers and the metrics and the profit and the efficiency than they are about the people. And they assume that if we make these things work over here, the people will just be happy. So where somebody's kind of sat in the middle of that and they're wanting to make more of a case for the people and lead for the people, how do you influence the leadership to kind of see the benefits of that, where they're more, their focus is rightly, like to a certain extent, on the business numbers? How do you influence them?
It's movement from systems to efficiency and metrics, and they all matter. The metrics and compliance and checklists, I mean, especially in healthcare, right? All of those things really matter. And we do need structure and accountability to make things work. But what I saw again and again is that the processes don't work without the people. So when staff are exhausted or disengaged or even feeling unsupported, even the best systems will fail. And of course they blame the people, but it's the system and the way the system works. So I began making the case by showing how people issues were system issues. For example, if communication breaks down, if morale is low, or if turnover is high, then those aren't just HR problems, they're leadership problems. And they have a real operational impact and consequence, including delays and errors, patient dissatisfaction. And so when we invest in people, when we listen and train them and support them and engage them, everything improves: performance, compliance, outcomes. And that's the lesson in putting people first. And so I think that you asked a specific question: what do leaders do to influence other leaders in focusing on the people? And I think what we do is we stand up and we speak up and we advocate. We become the voice of the people by interjecting that from wherever we are leading. Metrics and numbers are important, but how do we get those? We get those through the people. So through my work, I know that I teach leaders how to build trust, because trust is essential, and reduce friction. We've spent a lot of time talking about that. Well, a lot of the time it comes down to, what are we doing to cause people to have more stress and that productivity go down? If you only look at the numbers, then you're not seeing how people are actually functioning. What is getting in the way of, it's what I call friction. What is getting in the way of people being able to just perform their job? And it might be training. It might be, ineffective onboarding, for instance, takes longer for people to figure it out. Or if there's a lot of fear in the workplace, then, if people are walking on eggshells, all that effort and energy that goes into just navigating how to behave and what I can say, that's a lot of work. And so your productivity is going to go down and your disengagement, numbers will go up. Retention will go down. People will leave because you're reducing the ability for people to just thrive at work. They're just surviving. And so if we unlock the possibilities and their potential by creating safety at work, by being very clear in our communication and our expectations, by, you mentioned before we started today about just having fun at work, being able to create a work environment that works, where people feel comfortable coming to work and being authentic and having a good time and working together, building that team and community. That's where people get excited about coming to work. Then your numbers will come out. So it's kind of, maybe it's a backwards way of looking at it, or it's just different from how other people look at it. Because if you're looking at the numbers and dictating, you're creating that fear. But if you help people to do their best work, then the numbers are going to go up. Naturally, they're going to want to be successful.
I spent quite a lot of time in and fraud prevention in retail. So I looked a lot at internal theft and fraud for the business. And I tell this story quite a lot. I used to go into stores to do an audit, and I could turn up and do any variety of audits. There's all sorts of things that I could check on. And I just the business relied on me to go in, kind of spidey senses are tingling. What do I think's going on in here? What's going on? And quite often, first port of call, I'd just go to the rota. I'd go to the planning rota, the staff rota, and I'd look to see how many rotas were up, first of all. Because you go into a store and they've only got this week's rota up, or we've got some bigger problems about how you lead your people, because they need to have 3 weeks up, minimum, right? But I'd go in and I'd look at the rotas and I'd see the same people working late shifts, 5-6 days a week. And when somebody phoned in sick, if somebody would be crossed out, and then that person would still be rotated in again, it'd be another late shift. And so they'd be working 6-7 days, some weeks, a couple of days off in the middle, 6-7 days. And I'd the store manager would come behind me and be like, "Why are you looking at my staff? My staff are all right. Nobody steals in here." Like, "Oh, okay, no, I didn't say they were, but this person here, do they do all of your sick calls? Do they always come in when you need them?" "Yeah." "Oh, but they're solid. They've worked me for 15 years. They've been here since the beginning." "Okay, guarantee you that's the one I'm going to look at first, and I guarantee you that's where I'll find it." "Why? Why would they do it?" "Well, because you're not treating them right. You're treating them how they want to be treated, but it's not the way they need to be treated. They might be asking you for more shifts. They might say that they're happy working lots of late shifts, and they might be quite happy when you ask them to come in and cover sickness. But actually inside, they're a bit disgruntled. They get a bit annoyed over time, and they feel as though they're owed a bit more than what your average other employee earns, Start to feel a little bit entitled. I should get more because I always come in and cover sick. I always do the horrible shifts. I'm always here mopping up everybody else's mess." And it starts with little things and it becomes bigger things. And eventually, if nobody catches it, it becomes big, obvious things. And I guarantee, 9 times out of 10, that was the person. It was a tough job to do because I knew that person hadn't done anything wrong, really. They'd gone down a wrong path, but they'd been treated wrong in the first place. And it was hard to do anything about that because, I'd probably do the same in their situation as well. Most reasonable people probably would. You might not go to that extent of stealing, but you'd start to feel entitled and you'd feel as though you would do something more. So I think, there's a lot of that in any environment. You've got to look at where are you using up the goodwill of your people. There is only so much goodwill in the bank, and eventually you will break the people. Moving on from that a little bit then, obviously you've got a book, Leading at the Speed of People, and I love that title, it's phenomenal. Why did you decide to write that book, and how do you deal with people who still see things like emotional intelligence as the soft stuff, that it's all fluffy HR, right? And we don't really need that stuff.
Well, the book was born from years of watching people who had, the best intentions, but didn't have all the skills of what it took to really lead effectively. And also having some really bad, ineffective leaders that I, came across. And I do tell some stories in the book about those as well. And so that's, I wrote the book. I mean, this was my third book, actually. So this was, and I have some other books that I want to write. So I am a multiple author. But this book in particular, I really am very proud of and excited about because it really does, teach people how to lead effectively and be people-centered in their approach. And, what brought this home for me was working in behavioral health, where, emotional intensity is part of the job. And I, as I mentioned, I saw firsthand how a leader's presence, how they showed up, how they listened, how they handled conflict or managed their own stress had ripple effects on the entire team, and how that impacted how employees treated patients, of course, in my area. So I wrote the book because I saw the cost of not leading at the speed of people, which, creates burnout, turnover, disengagement. And I wanted to give leaders a more human-centered roadmap, one that shows us how to slow down. I mean, that's the big thing, is that when you're dealing with people, you can do tasks at 150 miles an hour and do this and do that and shift from one thing to another. But you can't do people that way. We have to slow down enough to really be thoughtful and connect with them. And so when you mentioned about emotional intelligence, at being soft stuff, so to speak, I remind people that it's the soft stuff, if you want to call it, that makes the hard stuff work. You can have the best strategy, the smartest team, and all the data. But if people don't trust you, if you can't navigate conflict and you just allow it to run rampant, or if your team is full of fear, as we've mentioned, and walking like eggshells around you, nothing works the way it should. And I'm trying to sell emotional intelligence as a nice to have. I show how it directly impacts results, engagement, productivity, retention, turnover. I mean, the bottom line, right? Because we also, you can look to statistics on the billions of dollars that companies spend on absenteeism and, retention strategies, and when somebody leaves and how much money that costs. And that just creates just such an level, just uproar within the department, the landscape changes. So honestly, once leaders experience what emotional intelligence can do for you, like self-awareness and empathy, once they shift their tone of voice and they listen differently, or they respond to someone with more clarity and calm, and they see how others respond and the impact that they have, then that's when they stop seeing it as soft. They see it as essential. So let's share a story. A client recently was struggling with two managers not getting along. She was a C-suite, and so she mentioned she has to talk to them about their communication, and she wanted some strategies for dealing with that. And I mentioned empathy. She said, "No, it's not empathy. It's communicating." So we talked about it, and eventually, we talked about what does empathy mean? Well, help this manager see the world from this manager's eyes, and help this manager see the world from this manager's eyes. And she finally got it, because once they understood what they have to deal with and the information that they need to be able to disseminate to their teams or to their vendors or whatever was going on for them, then they would communicate more effectively. And it was like light bulbs went off. And so sometimes we look for those hard skills, but they're really, it's understanding what people and how they function. People are messy. We're messy, and leaders need to better understand how to navigate people. And you would think by now we would know how to do this better, but I don't know why we look outside ourselves rather than inside ourselves. And in the book, I talk about us as individuals. We're the self-study course. We have a front row seat to what it means to be human. And the more we observe ourselves and observe how we feel when X happens, or the trauma that we've experienced. And no, nobody else's path is just like ours, but guarantee everybody's been through trauma. There are, 1 in 6 people who are suffering from addiction. Well, somebody knows somebody that's suffering from addiction or who had an overdose. So it's like, if we can just be more mindful, and then of course the statistics on mental illness and just, what people are struggling with, depression, anxiety, that just people are on meds, totally okay. No judgment there, but let's just be mindful that people are dealing with more than just the numbers and the spreadsheet. They're dealing with all this other stuff, sick parents, kids, whatever is going, financial issues. So when we can learn to be a little bit more compassionate and understanding, which again, it requires us to just slow down just a little bit so that we can connect with people. It just makes all the difference in the world.
I prefer to refer to what's traditionally termed soft skills as core skills. They're essential. They're the building blocks that you should build your leadership on, but they're very rarely the bits that we teach because, to your point, it requires us to look within. It's the hard work. You've got to do the hard work. It's easy to blame other people, but you can blame other people very easily, but we can't look within ourselves easily or match up how we think with others easily. But I think the key is, plenty of people start off as a process-oriented leader and worry about the numbers and efficiency, and learn later on that they can lead with people, and it's a much nicer way of doing things. It's a much easier way of doing things once you've got it. But nobody ever goes the other way. Nobody ever starts off as a people-centered leader and becomes an ROI and KPI-driven leader and forgets all about the people. And the reason for that is because once you've done it, you realize how much of a difference it makes and how much more pleasant everything is. Why would you ever go back? Mm-hmm. So I love your take on that.
Julie. I think it's inspirational. I think there's so much that other people can learn from all of that. I always seem to have guests on. I just want to go on for hours and hours. I could just ask so many questions and so many things I could share with the audience. Before we wrap the shop up and when we close things down, first of all, I'm going to make sure that all of your contact details are in the show notes and everything, so people can reach out if curious to learn more about your coaching, your course, your books. It'll all be in there. What's one outdated leadership mindset or business culture habit that you wish more leaders could just leave behind them when they're starting out?
Yeah, there's more than one, but I think what I would say that you have to have all the answers. That outdated model creates so much pressure and that unnecessary pressure. And again, if we're about reducing stress, reducing friction, anything that gets in the way, then that would be one of them. You don't have to have all the answers. It silences teams. People are looking up to you there's something special about, being the one that everybody looks to. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter where the ideas come from. And you have a team around you, so use them. Leadership isn't about control. It's about creating space for others to contribute, grow, and take ownership. And I thought about this in preparation for today. And, it is a risk to walk in and not have any of the answers. I remember my first year as the director of nursing, I asked a lot of questions, probably the first few months for sure. And then over time, but what it did was I really presented myself as, I don't know. Because I didn't know how they did things. I knew how to do things, but I didn't know how they did things. And there was a little bit of a risk because they're like, oh, she doesn't know anything. No, I don't. I don't know how you do things. And yet over time, they came to understand why I did that and that I wasn't coming in with their answers for them. I had to hear from them first. And so, people don't want to be micromanaged. They want to be trusted, respected, and heard. And leaders who still operate from that top-down, command and control style are missing the opportunity to really unlock the full potential of their team and to come together with their teams to create something that we all want so that it's not just about you. Like we mentioned the word vision earlier. The vision has to be something that's everybody's enrolled in, and we can create that together. But you can't create it without listening to your team and if you have the answer, then you're just telling them where they're going, rather than enlisting them and asking them questions about where they want to see it go. And so leadership isn't about being right. It's about getting it right, but together. You don't need to be the smartest person in the room, just the one that brings out the best in others so that you get the most from them.
Just the one that asks the right questions, right? I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for being a fabulous guest today. And Julie, we'll have to have you back on because I could probably ask you another 3 hours worth of questions. It's been awesome. Thank you very much for spending the time.
I would love it. Thank you so much, Paul. This has been a pleasure.
Awesome. And thank you at home for watching the show. Subscribe. Make sure you're giving us a follow. And if you'd be so kind as to drop us a rating on Spotify or Apple, that would be amazing as well. Thank you very much. And I'll see you next week on MarketPulse Pros and Pioneers.
Thanks for joining us for today's show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to feature on a future show, or you've got some ideas for folks who would make a great guest, please drop us a line. Contact details are in the show notes and I'd love to hear from you. Your host today was me, Paul Banks, founder at Javelin Content Management. Here at Javelin, we specialise in helping busy business owners just like you to repurpose video content, taking all the stress and tech problems away and turning your long form video into literally hundreds of pieces of content without breaking the bank. We describe it as getting ideas out of your head into video and out to your socials. If you want to launch your personal brand, become the vendor of choice for your audience, or maximise your sales revenue impact, we'd love to hear from you. Join us next Wednesday for the next episode, and don't forget to subscribe and give us a review. Our podcast is only possible with your continued support.